Hello, and welcome to our education research series. Maddie's insights are practical tips based on current research to help pets and people that you can use in your shelter. Today, our guest is Dr. Laura Reese, a professor in the School of Planning, Design, and Construction at Michigan State University. She's also the president of Professional Animal Welfare Services, which provides consulting services to animal shelters and rescues. Her research focuses on issues of animal welfare policy and shelter management. Today, Dr. Reese will talk about the human-animal bond between volunteers and their foster animals. We know that that bond can be very strong and sometimes stressful when the foster pet leaves the home. She'll share strategies that can help reduce that stress, how animal shelters can help foster volunteers cope with the pressure that can come with fostering. So let's welcome Dr. Reese to learn more.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here and have the opportunity to talk to you, particularly about this research of mine. I have a friend that jokingly calls this my me search because it basically is all about me, and that's why I'm interested in it. But I am a foster volunteer. I've been doing that for probably 15 years. Occasionally dogs, but mostly cats with personality disorders. But I also founded a foster-based rescue back when I lived in Michigan. And of course, that rescue only works if we have foster volunteers to take care of the animals. So I'm coming into fostering from sort of both doors, from being a foster myself and from having to recruit and manage fosters. So that's why this is all about me. And when I tell people that I'm a foster and that I've got foster animals, and I talk about it a lot, almost immediately they'll say, "Oh, I could never do that. I just couldn't let the animals go. I wouldn't be able to let them go." But the reality is that those of us that are fosters do that all the time. Yes, we foster fail, and I will proudly say over 15 years of fostering, I've only done that once. But for the most part, we know going into this that the animals are most likely not going to stay in our homes. So it got me interested in knowing how foster parents actually do this, with the idea that if we knew more about sort of the emotions of having the animal and letting it go, maybe we could help fosters manage those emotions and then be able to more easily recruit fosters and retain them. So the project looks at several questions. One is, to what extent does the human-animal bond operate for foster volunteers? In other words, are foster volunteers attached to their foster pets like they would be to their own animals? What kinds of emotions do the volunteers feel when a foster animal leaves? And that could be through adoption, rotating back into the shelter, hopefully not euthanasia, but it happens and it's part of the stress. And what kinds of coping and resilience strategies might reduce the stress and the grief that occurs when foster animals leave? And how do these emotions affect satisfaction? Because ultimately we want satisfied volunteers and continuing volunteers, and we want the volunteers to be healthy in their own emotions because that impacts how they can help the animals. So finally, how can shelters and rescues help volunteers cope with the very real emotions and stress and help them improve resilience? So those are the questions that are driving this research, which is a really large project, and I've tried to cut it down to fit into today's discussion. I'm an academic, so I think in models, and this is the model of what I'm expecting to happen. So what I'm expecting is that volunteers who have different demographic traits, age, genders, work situations, have different motivations for fostering, and that these things lead into the emotions. And the emotions in the box there are attachment to pets, the grief that we might feel when they leave, self-care practices to try to mitigate that, sort of I guess the ultimate foster self-care, the foster fail, and building up resilience, and how does that then impact satisfaction? So the data that I'm going to be talking to you today about come from surveys, a series of surveys of foster volunteers. And the surveys were distributed through the Pedigree Foundation, Shelter Animals Count, and the Petco Foundation. And I'm really grateful to them for being willing to send out email blasts and post notices. The members of those organizations, which are typically the directors, were asked to send the survey on to their foster volunteers. And in total, I got 946 responses, which is a huge amount for survey research. I think it speaks to the need that fosters have to talk about their fostering. And the surveys were conducted between March and September of 23. So it's all post-COVID. It has no ties to, situations, going on through COVID. So it's just in the past year. And one of the questions, or a set of questions, asked the volunteer respondents what kinds of support their shelters were providing them. And here you see, all the basic things that you provide, what to do in an emergency, how to care for the animals, how to feed them, basic handling, how to introduce them to your own animals. But the provision of emotional support is a little less common. The use of foster mentors to provide support is quite uncommon. And then communication tends to always be at the bottom. Very often fosters feel that they're not getting sufficient communication from their organizations. So these are the things that are typically provided. And these are the things that volunteers say they would like to have more of. And you'll see it's not a perfect match. So that big purple slice of the pie, that's training. Training for everything to do with fostering, training for how to train, training for how to market their fosters. That's the biggest desire. But then the next biggest slice is that 11% of communication. And in another study where I was looking at what this meant, a lot of fosters really want to have regular communication from the shelter that's proactive, where they just check in and how are things going. And so that's very important. And then these boxes here, the orange box is relationships with other fosters. This light green box is community help. So the fosters are looking for ways to reach out and engage with other fosters to get emotional support, but also to just get backup, like vacation fostering or help with transportation. So there's a little bit of gap between what we're commonly giving fosters and what they feel like they most need. The first question on the survey asked the respondents, all right, what 3 words first come into your mind when you think about fostering? And this is a word cloud from the first dimension. So the first words that come to their mind are rewarding, it's loving, it's essential, it's life-saving, it's helping, all of the good things. All right, you see a little bit of bittersweet showing up here, but it's not the first reaction. But on the third question, where you're getting the third reaction, now overwhelmingly it's hard, it's challenging, it's heart-wrenching, it's calling, it's a passion. And when you look across the three answers for a single volunteer, the same person will be saying it's heartwarming, it's fulfilling, and then right next to that, they're going to say, yeah, it's hard, it's challenging. So all of these things and emotions are in volunteers. We know that's in there because probably most of us have fostered as well. But I think shelters and rescues don't pay as much attention to how to deal with this hard stuff and how to help volunteers deal with it. I asked the volunteers how challenging they thought different kind of animals were to foster. And the number one type of challenging animal is behavioral fosters, followed by medicals. So the volunteers that are most likely to be stressed out and having some challenges are those with special needs, dogs and cats. There's something called the Lexington Attachment to Pet Scales. People have used the scale to study how attached individuals are to their pets. So I took those questions and put them on the foster survey, asking fosters how attached they were to their fosters. And what I found overall is that foster parents are just as attached to the foster animals, or even more attached than people are to their own pets. So the bottom line is fosters get attached. They do. And so you see very strong agreement with all of these questions that are measuring attachment to pets. Okay, so that's the first kind of building block in the story. They are attached. So if they're attached, what are they feeling when the animal leaves? And there's not been much research on animal foster caregiving, but there's a lot of research on human fostering. And that research has looked at grief when foster children leave, and they've come up with measures of grief. And I used those in the foster survey applied to animals. So things that indicate grief at separation are things like daydreaming about the foster, being irritable, missing them, feeling alone. So these are very strong grief reactions to the loss of that pet, even if they went into a really great home. Resilient people are better able to deal with grief. They found that resilient human foster parents are more likely to continue fostering and to be mentally healthy. So I again borrowed a scale from the psychology literature to measure resilience among animal fosters. And these are the kinds of things that are in that resilience scale. I can adapt to change. I can deal with whatever comes. I'm focused under pressure. Basically, these are people that bounce. You know, things come up in their lives and they're stressful, but they can bounce back. And what helps them bounce back is taking care of themselves. And there's two kinds of self-care. There's physical, where you're eating healthy and getting exercise and sleeping. But then there's the head stuff, the emotional parts of self-care, where you talk to other people and you express your grief and you reflect on things, but you also make space for laughter and fun. You might pray or meditate. These are the kinds of emotional well-being things that people can do. All right, finally, one more background slide. Part of the study also measures how satisfied volunteers are. There's a lot of measures out there about satisfaction. I use these based on a series of other studies and things I've tested out. So fosters are more satisfied if they don't see themselves ever stopping. That's the kind of intention to continue. Pleasures of fostering outweigh disadvantages. I like my organization. I like the fostering experience. It makes me feel good. I can make a contribution. And also what goes in here as well is the frequency of fostering. So more satisfied volunteers foster more, and they're less likely to take breaks, which can be a good thing, but it can also be a bad thing. All right, all of this is important to understand what the data are then telling us. So for any statistical wonks here, this is a bar chart made off of a regression analysis. And what I was wanting to do is explain resilience, what kinds of fosters are most resilient. And the bars here are variables that are strongly correlated with resilience. All right, so for whatever reason, I don't have an explanation for this. I'd be happy to take one. People who have their own cats appear to be more resilient. Dogs don't work. It has to be a cat. I don't know why. People who foster fail are more resilient. All right, grief it really hinders resilience. So people who feel more grief when animals leave are less resilient. They're less likely to bounce back. I asked people about why you're fostering. And so respondents who said, I'm really in it for the animals, to help the animals, to help them find homes, it's a calling. Those people are more resilient, and overwhelmingly, the volunteers that practice more self-care are more resilient, which is exactly what you would expect to see. Okay, so what does this imply for sheltering? First of all, it suggests allowing foster fails. I think most shelters do. My daughter fosters for rescue in the Washington, D.C. area, and they were not allowed to fail. They went into it understanding that they could not keep a foster. So maybe you do want to let them foster fail, but there needs to be some training wheels on it so people aren't failing so many times that their house is full of animals and they can't foster anymore. But what this is really saying is, how can shelters help volunteers practice self-care? And I think one of the most important things that the volunteers were asking for is an ability to talk to other volunteers, to get together, to share experiences like a foster support group, and to have a mentor, an experienced foster that you can call, that can say, oh, yeah, that happened to me. Why don't you try this? Just that group feeling. And yes, it would take the foster coordinator time to kind of get this support group going. But once it gets going, I think the volunteers can easily manage it themselves. The mentors can manage it. So the volunteers eventually, hopefully, will kind of just take it over on their own. Making volunteers aware of opportunities for self-reflection, so yoga, meditation. My shelter that I foster for here in South Carolina, they a few months ago they did puppy yoga. So members of the public could come and pay and do yoga with puppies, which I'm not a puppy fan, so I'm not sure the appeal of that, but you could do this with your volunteers. not regularly, but just occasionally, do some puppy yoga, do some cat yoga. Maybe your volunteer support group could go and have a yoga class together. Definitely allowing breaks from fostering. And if you're communicating regularly with fosters, you probably have a good idea of who needs a break based on how many they fostered and what kinds of animals they foster. And then really important self-care is to provide the volunteer some help so they can go on vacation with their family. So if they're busy and they need someone to drive the animal into the clinic to get a vaccination, some sort of support from other volunteers. Okay, what about the grief thing? What seems to make grief at separation worse? All right, one thing that came up, and this, by the way, is the only demographic variable, the only trait of the volunteer that is significantly related to any of these other variables. The demographics of the volunteer aren't related to resilience, they're not related to satisfaction, but age is related to grief at separation, with younger volunteers feeling more grief. So maybe they just haven't learned how to be resilient, which partly comes with age, but they are going to be the most troubled at the separation. People who don't do any emotional self-care or very little experience more grief. All right, what seems to lessen the grief? Attachment to pets. The more attached volunteers are to their fosters, the more unhappy they are when they leave. I mean, that makes sense. The more attached you are, and we do get attached, the more grief at separation. But the grief is worse for people who have people substituting separation attachments. So, general attachment is I play with the dog, I walk it, I, pet the cat. But people substitution is when the emotional relationship that you should be having with other humans, you're having with the animals. And so that makes it much more stressful when those animals leave. So what do you do about this? What can shelters do about this? Again, encourage the emotional self-care practices, but younger volunteers probably need a little more help. I think it's really important in orientations to be very open about all of those good words that the fosters were saying, but also the stress, so that people, particularly younger people, aren't blindsided with their feelings when the animals leave. So discussing this in orientation, perhaps having special support groups for younger fosters who would then also be mentored by more senior ones. Maybe you need to check in on the younger fosters a little bit. And then, like I said, people substituting attachment is problematic. Well, how do you even know if you've got volunteers that are people substituters? In a way, all of us are, right? I have animals because I generally prefer their companionship to people. But it's, it's a fine line. You don't want it to completely have someone with no human support in their lives. So, volunteers fill out a lot of forms when they're thinking about fostering, maybe a brief survey on attachment styles to perhaps highlight those kind of people that are going to be people substituting, not to keep them from fostering, but to just be aware that they might need a little bit more support. And then the more sort of esprit de corps building, foster events, support groups, the more you can help fosters tie to each other, the more it will help those who are people substituting. Hopefully they will feel comfortable being around other fosters who understand them and that this might, promote healthier ties with the animals and healthier ties with humans. Okay, last data slide. What leads to satisfaction? Again, you see here there's no demographic variables. Gender, age, it doesn't matter. People who are going into fostering for human motivations are more satisfied. These are the people who say, oh yeah, I really like the gratitude of the fosters. I really like the marketing and talking to people about my fosters. I like having a companion. So they're looking for experiences and feedback that helps their sort of self-esteem doing things that they like. Those folks are more satisfied. More resilient people are more satisfied. People who have more general attachment to the animals, the healthier kind of attachment, are more satisfied. And again, people that foster fail are more satisfied. There really has been almost no research into foster failing. It's definitely something I want to look at a little bit more carefully as a result of this project. So finally, what does this mean for sheltering? Maybe we want to consider asking a little bit, maybe on a little survey, about motivations. Why are they going into fostering? Is it because they are lonely, or do they really like projects or marketing? And it might also kind of help determine what are the best animals that might be a good fit for this kind of person with these motivations. And then to promote as much as you can general attachment to fosters, the play, companionship, healthy activities, and then give a lot of support for resilience building from the other slide and allowing foster fails. I've been thinking about what are the implications for foster recruitment? I think there's a lot of implications for orientation and for how you want to build up foster support groups. But what might this say for recruiting fosters? And I was just thinking about, at foster recruiting fairs, and definitely having presentations. And these presentations could be social media. It could be people talking on Instagram or on Facebook, having current fosters talk about their experiences. Maddie's Fund did a survey that suggests that the best recruiters of new fosters, are existing fosters. And they found that same relationship in human foster care. So definitely involving your fosters, your current fosters, and to have them talk about both the joys and the challenges. And when you're feeling challenges, here are things you can do to help with that. The Maddie survey also indicated that a lot of people just don't get how important fostering is. So obviously that needs to come across in the recruitment. And just emphasizing that fostering can give you, human social support and social opportunities as well. Because part of the fostering experience is to get animals more emotionally sound, but also the human part of that human-animal bond. And this is just a replay of the model, but now we've talked through demographics don't matter so much. Motivations do matter. In grief, they matter in satisfaction. People are very attached to their foster animals. They do suffer grief. And self-care is really necessary to build resilience, which leads to satisfaction. So this is the last slide, and then I think I've left open a good amount of time for questions. These are the basic takeaways, at least as I see them. And the first thing I think we all need to remember that foster providers should remember is that attachment to foster pets is just as strong as to your own pets. And as a result, it can cause grief when they leave. Right? Emotional self-care practices can help with that grief and build resilience. Resilient fosters are more satisfied. And shelters and rescues can promote resilience through providing foster mentors and support groups, promoting and offering self-care practices occasionally, holding social activities for foster volunteers, anything to get them together so that they can help each other.
Thank you so much, Dr. Reese. That's
I'm gonna
really interesting. We have a couple of questions. This person is asking, were the questions asked of fosters of all species or just dogs? They said there was...
the first research that we did on this topic was just dogs. All the data that I was talking about today is dogs and cats. I have to say we didn't include small mammals, but yes, this is both dogs and cats.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Have I analyzed the data to separate responses from dog fosters from cat fosters? I can do that. I haven't done it yet.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I bet that would be interesting. Another is just a comment that they wish we'd stop with calling them foster fails. They're trying to promote the usage of foster win, which is excellent.
Okay, that's a good point. Yeah, I'm working on the write-ups for this. So I will definitely think about that.
Julie Lonnie says, Dr. Reese, great webinar. In the cohort of your study, were you able to categorize which responders have healthy attachments from those that don't? And do their responses differ depending on which camp they belong in?
I mean, I hate to label people substituting attachment as unhealthy, because I think for some people, the literature on health and pets is really, really conflicting. And it does suggest that having a pet makes you much healthier, but then also people that really have a lot of mental health issues are more likely to have pets. I think it's very hard to say. Certainly general attachment is great. You're doing all the things with the animal that it needs you to do to be able to attach to a person, which can help it get adopted. But, so I don't want to label people substituting as unhealthy, but I can separate out the people in the survey, those that are high on general and high on people substituting, and look at their responses in other areas.
Awesome. Can you speak more to the attachment to fosters finding on fosters being more attached to their foster pets than people are to their own pets?
Yeah, I in an earlier study we looked at the responses to that scale. So people would get a score on that attachment to pet scale. And then we looked at literature that had used that scale for their pets, and the foster parents were scoring more highly than the pet owners were. I could speculate maybe a little bit. At least for me, because I jokingly said I take cats with mental health problems, but I think my interactions with them are very purposeful, and I'm very aware of how I'm acting with them, and they're very intense in some cases. So I think in a short period of time, I do get very attached to them. And it may be something to do with you're in there trying to sort of heal this particular animal, and that's a very strong bond.
Such a good point. Misha says, I may be misunderstanding, but earlier you said animal motivated people are more resilient, but that human motivated people experience less grief. Wouldn't that make them the more resilient group? If looking at motivations, which is the greater red flag that indicates they might need more support?
Yeah, I don't think that, no, your take on this is correct. It's I don't think it's a red flag. I think you're getting different things. So the human motivated people seem to be happier with their foster experiences. But the people substituting are having more grief. And the animal motives are more, can I bring my PowerPoint back up?
Yes,
Or
absolutely.
thank you. Okay. So the people with the animal motives are more resilient. They're coming up higher on resilience. There's no relationship with grief. But the human motivateds, so the animal motivateds are more resilient, and the human motivateds are more satisfied. Now, why that's exactly the case, I would have to think about that a bit. And I'm not sure what that's meaning. So it's a really good question, and I don't know the answer.
Do you have any research that suggests how quickly a foster should take another foster into their care?
I haven't done anything, and I've not seen anything about that. It's almost a situation where, like, you know it when you see it. You would hope that the the volunteer themselves would realize when they need a little break, but it might require a foster mentor, say, talking with them and seeing if they do need a little pause. If an animal has been euthanized for behavior or for medical, they might need a little bit more space. I had a foster cat for almost a year, and I need a little space just because, she was here for so long. But I knew it. So I think it's a combination of the volunteer and the foster coordinator or foster mentors talking with that person and encouraging a break when they need it. And it doesn't have to be a long break, but I think breaks are a really good thing.
Absolutely. Would giving the advice of conducting the foster in a way such as daycare would giving the advice of conducting the foster in a way such as daycare considered a healthy mental outlook to fostering? And I'm not sure if I understand the question, but
yeah, I'm not sure I understand the question. Like you're just, I mean, it could be a question about very short foster stints, like overnights or day outs, which are really, really good for everybody. Or if it's a question of, like, do daycare people get it as attached to their, yeah, I'm not sure what the question is.
okay.
But
Allison,
go ahead.
I'm sorry. Allison said we can let her ask live.
Okay.
So, oh, awesome. She's on. Tara, would you like to ask your question live? You're muted at the moment. So we would need.
I would say let's go off. She's still allowed to talk when she comes back.
Okay. All right.
There's, the research out there that's on foster overnights and days out and everything. Those kinds of programs obviously are good for the animals, but they're also good for recruiting fosters, because people who are on the fence thinking, oh, I can't do that. Well, try it for a day, try it for a weekend, And then it feels like less pressure. And I think that's a good gateway drug into fostering.
For sure. That's how I ended up doing it too. All right. Cole is asking, I work for a crisis fostering program for owned pets. So the pets are going back to their owners after the crisis is resolved. Did your research examine that type of fostering and any differences in emotional responses?
Yeah, I really wish we had, and it might be something for future research. As I said at the beginning, all of this is me search, right? It's all about me. The cat I had for a year, her mom was on deployment overseas in the military. So I knew that that cat was going back. I feel differently about that cat than other cats? Yeah, I got really attached to her. So I think that's a really, really good question. And I'm hoping I haven't looked at the how common those kinds of respite foster care programs are, but I'd love to see a lot more of them. And I think then we need to look really carefully. My guess is that kind of foster is a very special subset of the other group, and we need to understand what makes them tick.
Okay. Donna says, 3 things outweigh the grief I feel when a foster leaves my house with a new family. Relief that the extra work is over for a bit. Pride, the great kittens I raised. And the big picture, lots more kittens out there need my help. Next. Perfect.
Yeah, that's kind of, yep. I'll swap a cat out for once a cat gets a little bit normal and they have a weirder one in the shelter, I just swap them out and they just keep coming. My work here is done.
Ralph is asking, and this is a really good question, is there a way to tell when the potential foster households are being saturated in a community, and are there statistics on foster populations?
Oh, that's a fascinating question. Yeah, and again, because I'm a data wonk, my immediate mind goes to, well, how could we come up with those data? How would we figure that out?
I know a couple of years ago, Austin Pets Alive worked with a organization, and they did some, I wish I could remember exactly how they did it, but they surveyed the community and found that that there were like quite a few more potential foster homes than they were using, and they have an enormous program. So it was pretty exciting. I wish I could think of there's got to be a recording of it. But um, but on the whole, I feel like there's a lot more out there that we're just hitting the tip of the iceberg now.
Yeah, I mean, just personally, I know many, many, many more people that don't foster than people that do. So it is reaching out to those people, and I hope by continually talking about my experiences, I can be partly an ambassador to getting people thinking, yeah, maybe I could do that.
Absolutely. What if the foster doesn't agree with needing a break?
Oh, when they do and they don't, yeah. I don't think we had that. Oh, we did have a situation in my rescue. Yeah, I think at least what we did was we just had to do the tough love and say, you really, let's just wait, a couple weeks, and then, we'll talk about it again. I think probably the organization has to be the one to make a tough decision, and not like you can never foster again, but you need to take a break.
Courtney is asking, or first saying, thanks so much for your presentation and your work. I've conducted a similar study with kitten foster parents and found that human personality traits had impacts on fostering practices. I'm wondering if you looked at human personality traits, or if you have any thoughts on using a potential screening tool for matching foster parents with animals.
I love the idea of a screening tool, because one of the things that volunteers would like is to see better matching between them and the foster animal. I have not been into the research looking at what a human personality test would be. Although I think they've been using the Q bark. There's a Q bark for cats and dogs, where people have been registering, where you can go and answer questions about your dog and now cat's personality. And they've been running companion surveys about the human personality. So I could definitely look into that, or you could look into that. I think that's a great idea. Whether you're a couch potato or the kind of things that we use to classify the personalities of the animal. Is there a more systematic way to do that with the human?
Julie Lynn is asking, if I remember correctly in one of your slides, training is important support for fosters. Were you able to look at the foster's training experience as an indicator of resiliency?
Oh, that would have been great too. There are no questions on these particular most recent surveys about the extent of training. I do have a survey that asked about training, but it didn't ask about really resiliency. The problem is, you can only ask a certain amount of questions. And so there's always more that you would want to know, which is why I think I'll be doing research until I'm in my hundreds, because there's always more that I want to know. That would be really interesting to look at.
We have a couple of, or just a comment, Casey said, what about calling it foster fits? Like they fit together.
Yeah.
Sounds nice.
I mean, we did ask them, there were questions asking them why they did the foster fail. And there's the usual stuff of I just fell in love with the foster, I couldn't let it go. But then one of them was also, well, the animal just seems so happy in my home. The animal thought that this was its fit. So they kept it. So I like the fit language.
Mm-hmm. Mary says, thank you, Dr. Reese. Would you say there's a time frame between when foster takes in another, and I'm sorry, between when one foster takes in another foster after theirs leave?
Yeah, I don't think there's a rule of thumb. Again, I think it's going to be up to knowing the individual fosters. For some of us, I specialize in a certain kind of animal, a certain kind of cat. So I usually get a break until one of those very special cats shows up at the shelter. So I do tend to get breaks because they're holding me for a particular thing. But then I think other people are fine having an animal go and turning right around. I think it's really trying to know what's going on with your individual fosters.
Do you have experiences with foster hospice? Is there a big emotional difference? And then are there specific preparations for this type of foster?
Yes, another excellent question that I don't know the answer to. There's a study or two out there about people who raise like seeing eye dogs, service dogs, and their attachment. So there's a little bit of stuff circulating around out there, but I haven't seen anything with hospice. I mean, I know there's a lot of hospice programs, but looking at those fosters specifically would be really interesting. I can see a project where you would look at all of these different sort of specialized, respite care, hospice. That'd be really interesting. I'll be back and talk to you when I do that project.
Absolutely. Do we have adoption data on fosters who are returned to the shelter versus those who are adopted right from the foster home?
I believe, and I couldn't come up with the citation, that there's lower rates of return if they've been in a foster home. And part of that is the animal's ability to attach, but also able to provide the adopter with so much more information. So I think the returns are lower if they've been fostered. Plus they learn stuff, and there's just 1,000 reasons why that would be the case.
Were you able to tell if there was a link between how long someone had been fostering and resiliency? I could see more experienced fosters being more resilient.
If there had been a significant correlation, I would have put it in the bar chart. So the answer is no. But I would have to play around with like what's going on there and why is the case, because you would expect that to be the case. But there also is a lot of fostering that is a calling. And I suspect that there's people that keep doing it even if they're suffering. And those folks need the help and the breaks.
Is there an existing quiz or questionnaire that you recommend when screening fosters, helping to determine their attachment style?
I am absolutely available to help you write those. I have never seen a canned one. And you might by looking on Maddie's site or other ASPCA to see if anybody's got questions that they've already used. I haven't seen them. So you might have to do your own.
Thank you so much for being here with us today. We really appreciate your presentation and the information that you have told us is it's so interesting. And if there are any questions that you have after this, we'll post them on Maddie's Pet Forum. Thank you all, and we will see you next time. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Okay.